Imagine you walk into a machine. It looks ordinary enough: metal walls, soft lights, maybe a glass door that slides shut behind you. You press a button. There's a brief flash, and instantly, according to the promise, you appear somewhere else, maybe across the planet, maybe on Mars. You step out. You feel normal. Your heart is beating. Your hands look the same. You remember your name, your childhood, what you had for breakfast, and the exact moment you stepped into the machine. From the outside, it looks like transportation. But here is where we must slow down and ask a careful question. What would teleportation actually mean in terms of physics? In science fiction, teleportation is usually described as your body dissolving into energy, traveling as a beam of light, and then reassembling somewhere else. That makes for dramatic visuals, but physics does not support that idea in any simple way. According to modern physics, especially quantum mechanics, what defines any physical object is not some mystical essence. It is the exact arrangement and state of its particles. Every atom in your body has a position. Every electron has a quantum state. Every neuron in your brain has electrical activity and chemical concentrations arranged in an incredibly precise pattern. You are not just made of atoms. You are made of atoms arranged in a very specific way. If I scramble that arrangement, even slightly, you are no longer the same person. If I rearrange the atoms in your brain, your memories change. If I rearrange the atoms in your cells, your body stops functioning. So from a physicist's perspective, teleportation would not mean moving you. It would mean capturing the complete information that describes your structure down to the smallest detail and reconstructing that structure somewhere else. Think of it like this. Suppose you have a book. Instead of shipping the physical book across the world, you scan every page, send the digital file, and print an identical copy at the destination. The words are the same. The ink patterns are the same. The story is the same. But is it the same physical book? No. It is a new object that shares the same pattern. Teleportation, as physics imagines it, would work more like copying a file than moving a suitcase. The machine would have to scan every particle in your body, record its exact state, transmit that information, and then use raw materials at the destination to assemble a body in precisely the same configuration. Notice something important here. Nothing material travels from point A to point B, only information does. And this is not a small detail. It is the central issue. Because if teleportation works by reconstructing your pattern somewhere else, then we must ask what happens to the original pattern at the starting point. Is it left intact? Is it destroyed? Can there be two versions? Once we understand that teleportation is about information and structure, not magical transport, the comforting simplicity disappears. We are no longer asking whether your body moves. We are asking whether a recreated pattern is truly you. Now let's take the next step carefully, because this is where the real tension begins. Suppose we have built a perfect teleportation machine. Not an approximate one. Not something that gets close enough. A flawless device that records the exact quantum state of every particle in your body, every atom, every neuron, every electrical signal firing in your brain at that exact moment. It gathers all of that information and sends it to Mars. On Mars, another machine receives the data and reconstructs a body that matches the original down to the smallest measurable detail. Same scars, same fingerprints, same neural connections, same memories. The person who steps out believes they are you. They remember deciding to teleport. They remember childhood birthdays, awkward conversations, private thoughts no one else knows. From their perspective, the experience feels continuous. One moment they were on Earth, the next moment Mars. Now here's the twist. Imagine that during this process, the original body on Earth is not destroyed. Perhaps the engineers forgot. Perhaps the destruction mechanism failed. Whatever the reason, you now have two physically identical versions. Both are awake. Both are conscious. Both insist they are the real you. Which one is correct? You might try to say, well, the original is the real one. But the Mars version has exactly the same claims. They possess the same memories, the same psychological continuity. From inside their mind, nothing feels copied. Nothing feels artificial. They did not experience a break. They simply stepped into a machine and arrived. From a physics standpoint, there is no measurable difference between them. And this is the heart of the paradox. If teleportation produces a being that is physically and mentally identical to you, then in every observable way, it is you. It will behave like you, speak like you, love the same people, fear the same things. No experiment could distinguish the copy from the original. But identity feels singular. It feels like there is one center of experience, not two. Right now, as you listen to this, there is a single stream of consciousness happening. If I duplicate you perfectly, that stream does not branch into two shared viewpoints. Instead, two separate streams begin, each claiming to be the continuation. So identity cannot simply be about structure, because structure can be duplicated. It cannot simply be about memory, because memory can be duplicated. It cannot simply be about personality, because personality can be duplicated. The moment duplication becomes possible, our ordinary definition of self begins to collapse. And notice something unsettling: the Mars copy does not feel like a copy. They feel original, completely authentic. If you were the one stepping out on Mars, you would not feel like a replacement. You would feel like yourself, which forces a difficult conclusion. If the machine destroys the original after scanning, the only difference between that scenario and the duplication scenario is that one version no longer exists. But the Mars version would feel exactly the same either way. So if the original is destroyed and a perfect duplicate continues, has travel occurred? Or has one person been ended and another, indistinguishable person begun? This is not a technical glitch. It is not a minor philosophical quibble. It is a direct consequence of understanding that you are defined by information. And information can, in principle, be copied. And once copying enters the picture, the idea of a single, indivisible self becomes much harder to defend. Let's now narrow the focus and ask what physics itself actually says, and just as importantly, what it does not say. Physics is remarkably precise when it comes to describing matter. We can write equations that predict how particles move, how atoms bond, how neurons exchange electrical signals. Quantum mechanics gives us a mathematical framework for describing the smallest scales of reality. General relativity describes gravity and the structure of space-time. These theories are extraordinarily successful. They allow us to build computers, satellites, lasers, and medical scanners. But here's the quiet truth: none of these equations mention consciousness. There is no symbol in Schrödinger's equation for self. There is no term in Maxwell's equations for awareness. There is no particle in the standard model labeled identity. From the standpoint of physics, you are a highly organized collection of particles obeying physical laws. Your brain is an arrangement of neurons exchanging electrochemical signals. Your memories correspond to stable physical structures, networks of synaptic connections shaped by experience. Your personality reflects patterns of activity in a biological system. If we reproduce that system exactly, not approximately, but exactly, physics predicts that it will behave identically. The reconstructed brain will fire in the same patterns. The same thoughts will arise. The same words will be spoken. In other words, physics is concerned with structure and dynamics. If those are duplicated, the behavior is duplicated. But here is where the silence becomes important. Physics can describe behavior from the outside. It can describe what the system does. It can describe what the brain outputs: speech, movement, measurable electrical activity. What it cannot describe, at least not yet, is subjective experience itself. There is something it feels like to be you right now. There is an inner perspective, a point of view. This first-person aspect of existence is not captured directly by any physical equation. We can correlate it with brain states. We can say certain neural patterns accompany certain experiences. But correlation is not explanation. So when we ask whether teleportation preserves you, we are not just asking whether the structure continues. We are asking whether subjective experience continues. And here physics reaches its limit. If a perfect copy of your brain is made, physics says the copy will behave exactly like you. It will claim to be conscious. It will insist it remembers your life. It will pass every behavioral test for awareness. But physics does not contain a rule that says whether the original stream of consciousness jumps to the copy, continues in the original, splits, or simply ends. That question is not answered by the equations. This gap is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness, the problem of explaining why and how physical processes give rise to subjective experience at all. Until that problem is solved, teleportation remains philosophically unstable. We know how to describe particles. We know how to describe fields. We know how to describe information. But we do not yet know how to describe the fact that there is something it is like to exist. And so when we ask whether teleportation kills you, physics can say something very clear about matter and information, but it becomes strangely quiet about the one thing you care about most, whether the experience of being you continues uninterrupted. Let's slow this down and look at something far less dramatic than teleportation. Something so ordinary that we almost never question it. Right now, the atoms in your body are not permanent residents. They are temporary participants in a process. The carbon atoms in your cells were once in the air, in plants, in other animals. The oxygen you're breathing will leave your body in minutes. Even the atoms in your brain, the organ you associate most closely with you, are gradually replaced over time through metabolism. Biologically speaking, you are not made of the same atoms you were made of years ago, and yet you feel like the same person. That's interesting. If identity depended strictly on having the exact same physical particles, then you would have died many times already, simply because the material changed. But that doesn't seem to be how we think about ourselves. What seems to matter is not the individual atoms, but the arrangement, the structure, the organization. Here's a simple analogy. Think of a whirlpool in a river. The water molecules that form the whirlpool are constantly changing. New water flows in. Old water flows out. But the pattern, the swirling structure, remains stable. Is the whirlpool a thing, or is it a process? It looks like an object. You can point to it. But it's really a continuously maintained pattern in moving water. You might be something like that. A stable pattern in constantly changing matter. Or think of a flame. If you light a candle, the flame appears steady. But the atoms involved in the chemical reaction are constantly being replaced. The flame persists not because the matter is the same, but because the process continues. So perhaps personal identity is more like a flame than a statue. A statue depends on preserving the same material. A flame depends on preserving the same dynamic pattern. If that's the case, then the idea of teleportation becomes more subtle. If you are fundamentally a pattern, a particular organization of matter and energy, then recreating that pattern elsewhere might seem sufficient to preserve you. After all, if replacing atoms gradually over time doesn't destroy you, why should replacing all of them at once matter? But here's where the tension reappears. In the gradual replacement case, metabolism, cell turnover, there is continuity of process. At no moment does the pattern completely stop. The system evolves smoothly from one state to the next. There is an unbroken chain of cause and effect connecting yesterday's brain to today's brain. Teleportation, at least as usually imagined, interrupts that chain. The original pattern is scanned and destroyed. Then, somewhere else, the same pattern is reconstructed. From the outside, the two situations look similar. In both cases, atoms change. In both cases, the pattern exists, but from the inside, there may be a difference between gradual transformation and abrupt replacement. Imagine turning off a computer and destroying it, then building an identical computer somewhere else and turning it on with the same data. Is it the same running process resumed, or a new process starting from the same saved state? With a machine, we don't worry. But with consciousness, we hesitate. The question becomes whether identity depends only on pattern, or whether it also depends on continuous physical causation. An unbroken chain linking one moment of awareness to the next. And that is something we do not yet fully understand. Now we arrive at a technical constraint from physics that makes this discussion even sharper. It's called the no-cloning theorem, and despite the intimidating name, the core idea is surprisingly simple. In quantum mechanics, the exact state of a particle contains more information than we can directly observe. If you try to measure an unknown quantum state in full detail, the act of measurement disturbs it. You cannot copy an unknown quantum state perfectly without altering the original. Nature simply does not allow perfect duplication of arbitrary quantum information. This is not a technological limitation. It's not that our machines aren't good enough. It's a built-in rule of the universe. So if we imagine a true quantum-level teleporter, one that captures the exact physical state of every particle in your body, it cannot simply read that information while leaving the original untouched. The process of extracting the complete state would inevitably disturb and effectively destroy the original configuration. In other words, perfect copying is forbidden. Perfect transfer requires destruction. This changes the emotional tone of teleportation completely. In science fiction, we often imagine stepping into a beam of light and emerging somewhere else as if we were gently transported. But according to quantum theory, the realistic version would be far more violent at the microscopic level. Your original physical state would be dismantled in order to transmit the necessary information. The machine would not move you, it would disassemble you. And then, elsewhere, it would assemble a new structure with the same pattern. From the outside, observers would see continuity. They would see you enter the machine and then see you walk out at the destination. But physically, what happened is closer to demolition followed by reconstruction. Now, here is the crucial point: the reconstructed version would be, in every measurable sense, identical to the original. Same neural connections, same molecular structures, same electrical activity patterns in the brain. If the original brain state produced the thought, "I hope this works," the reconstructed brain would produce the same thought. So behaviorally and physically, nothing would distinguish the two scenarios. But the no cloning theorem forces a stark structure onto the process. It cannot be gentle duplication. It must be destructive transfer. And once destruction enters the picture, the question becomes unavoidable. If the original physical process that generated your current stream of consciousness is terminated, and a new but identical process begins elsewhere, is that continuation or replacement? Physics can tell us that the second system will function identically. It can tell us that no physical law has been violated. It can tell us that information has been preserved. But physics does not tell us whether subjective awareness survives a discontinuity in its physical substrate. This is where the no cloning theorem becomes more than a technical curiosity. It forces teleportation into a specific form, one that resembles annihilation followed by replication. And once we see it that way, the comforting image of travel begins to dissolve. What remains is a transfer of information and the quiet possibility that information preservation may not be the same thing as personal survival. Let's compare teleportation to something much more familiar: sleep. Every night you lose consciousness. In deep sleep, there is no awareness of the room, no sense of time passing, no active narrative voice in your head. For several hours, the vivid experience of being you seems to disappear. And yet, you do not fear going to sleep. Why? Because when you wake up, there is a sense of continuity. The same brain that entered sleep is the one that wakes. The physical structure of the brain remains intact throughout the night. Neurons continue low-level activity. Metabolism continues. The system never fully shuts down or gets replaced. There is an unbroken physical chain connecting the person who fell asleep to the person who wakes up. Now compare that with teleportation as described by quantum mechanics. In teleportation, the original brain would be scanned and destroyed. The physical system generating your current conscious experience would cease to function. Later, somewhere else, a new brain, physically identical, would begin operating. From the outside, this might look similar to sleep. A pause, then a restart. But physically, it is very different. Sleep is a modulation of activity within the same continuous system. Teleportation is termination followed by reconstruction. The question becomes subtle but sharp. Does consciousness require uninterrupted physical continuity, or is restarting an identical pattern sufficient? We accept sleep because the underlying process persists. Teleportation challenges that intuition by breaking the chain completely. And that break, however brief, may be the dividing line between survival and replacement. Now consider a sharper version of the thought experiment. You step into the teleportation machine. It scans you perfectly. It transmits the information. A copy is assembled on Mars. But this time, due to a technical oversight, the original on Earth is not destroyed. Both versions are awake. Both remember entering the machine. Both expect to be on Mars. Both feel like the uninterrupted continuation of the same life. From the perspective of physics, two identical physical systems now exist. They will begin to diverge immediately because they are in different environments, but at the instant of duplication, they are indistinguishable in structure and memory. Now ask a very personal question. Before stepping into the machine, which future experience should you expect to have? Will you open your eyes on Mars? Or will you remain on Earth? You cannot logically expect to experience both streams of consciousness. Each version will have its own separate awareness. They will quickly accumulate different experiences. One will feel Martian gravity, the other will feel Earth's. This reveals something uncomfortable. Identity, as we experience it, seems to be tied to a single continuous perspective. But duplication produces two equally valid claimants. If both are physically and psychologically continuous with the original, then identity cannot be a simple matter of similarity. And if the machine destroys the Earth version after duplication, nothing about the Mars version changes internally. The only difference is that one branch has been eliminated. That suggests a troubling possibility. Teleportation may not move you forward. It may simply create a successor who believes they are you, while the original stream of awareness quietly ends. At this point, it's important to admit something clearly. We do not have a complete theory of consciousness. We can describe the brain in extraordinary detail. We can measure electrical activity, map neural connections, observe how injuries affect personality and memory. But none of this tells us exactly why physical processes produce subjective experience at all. We don't know whether consciousness depends purely on structure, meaning that if the arrangement is reproduced, the experience automatically follows, or whether it depends on continuity, an unbroken physical chain from one moment to the next, or whether our entire way of framing the question is flawed. There are serious scientific debates about this. Some researchers believe consciousness emerges from information processing alone. If that's true, then any system implementing the same informational structure should generate the same experience. Others suspect that specific biological processes, perhaps even quantum-level effects, are essential. We simply don't know. There is also a deeper difficulty: subjective experience is private. Science works by public measurement. If a teleported copy insists it feels continuous, we have no external test to confirm or deny that claim. We can measure brain activity, but we cannot step inside the experience itself. So when we ask whether teleportation kills you, we are reaching beyond what current science can decisively answer. We understand matter well. We understand information reasonably well. But we do not yet understand why there is something it is like to be a physical system. And until we solve that mystery, teleportation will remain not just a technical challenge, but a conceptual one, exposing the limits of what we truly know about ourselves. Humans struggle with the idea of teleportation because our brains are wired to think about identity in very concrete ways. From an evolutionary standpoint, it made sense to track individual bodies. If someone looks like you, walks like you, and remembers the same things, it was crucial for survival to recognize that person as a single, continuous self. Our mental models evolved to keep track of physical continuity and behavioral patterns, not abstract questions about identity as information. Teleportation forces us to separate three things that we normally assume are inseparable: physical structure, psychological continuity, and subjective experience. Our brains are used to these three aligning perfectly. If your body is intact, your memories are intact, and your awareness feels continuous, you are comfortable calling that you. But teleportation challenges that alignment. The physical body can be destroyed, a copy can exist elsewhere, and the subjective, you, may or may not continue. Language itself is part of the problem. We lack precise words to describe the difference between a perfect duplicate and the original. We talk about identity as if it is a single, indivisible property. But in reality, it may be more like a process or pattern. When duplication becomes possible, our instinctive definitions collapse. Even our social and moral intuitions struggle with this. We naturally treat copies as separate individuals, even if they are identical in every measurable way. Our minds are not designed to comfortably handle branching consciousness, duplicated selves, or the idea that continuity might be essential for identity. Teleportation makes us confront that the self might not be a fixed object, but a dynamic process. It is the interplay of matter, information, and consciousness evolving through time. Our struggle to explain it is not just philosophical confusion. It reflects a fundamental mismatch between human intuition and the nature of reality as revealed by physics and neuroscience.